Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Cheerleader podcast. I'm your host, Jasmine Neely, and today we have a special guest. We have Allison Yamamoto. Welcome, Allison.
Yay, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Allison, I want to give you a chance to give some background about who you are and what you do to help athletes in aesthetic sports. So, how about we start there?
So I'm a sports nutritionist and I am also founder of Koa Athletic Health, which really specializes in helping female athletes restore hormone health. And we specialize in a condition called REDS, which we can get into, but it's a really, really, really common challenge that folks in aesthetic sports will face. And as a former NCAA cheerleader myself, I actually experienced a lot of these challenges throughout my athletic career, where we really face unique pressures in terms of how we are navigating the journey with our hormonal health, with our nutrition, with our exercise output, and how to get that into the right balance that's really supporting our performance, but also our longevity. So I work with female athletes across cheerleading, dance, gymnastics, endurance sports, kind of across the gamut, on combining a lot of the evidence-based research with my own lived experience and my experience working with these athletes to help them restore their hormonal health and kind of invest in a lot of the foundational practices around nutrition and around our training that can really support us holistically.
That is amazing. And you mentioned Reds, and I think I might have heard about Reds because I think I might know somebody that may have had it recently. But
Interesting.
I know you have an interesting story about how you lost your period. And when a woman hears that, like when I first heard that, I was like, you know what? That kind of sounds like a blessing and a curse. Because when I hear that, I'm like, I don't have to worry about, I have to deal with my period. That's great. But then you start to wonder, I'm sure you probably did,
hmm
if something is off with your body. So tell us about REDS and how it came about, I guess, from overtraining and underfueling. Where does that come from?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it stands for relative energy deficiency in sport. And exactly as you said, it's essentially in its most simplistic form. It means that your whole system is becoming downregulated as a response to overtraining and or underfueling. Usually there's some like combination because they're kind of feeding into each other. And one of the things that can happen, especially when you're actually in a more severe state of relative energy deficiency, is that your period can go completely missing. And to your point, for a very, very long period of time, this was actually really dismissed or even praised because, okay, if you're an athlete and you're not getting a period, like we've all had the annoying experience for like, we had our period and then had to do some sort of performance or we had to be in uniform and like the logistics of having to navigate that is something that you kind of have to live with, but it does feel like an inconvenience.
Hmm.
And so for a long period of time, it was really just like normalized. Like, okay, you're not getting your period anymore. Well, that's kind of fine. Like, if anything, it's kind of nice, like, given that you don't have that additional logistic every single month. But to your point, it was actually a red flag that there were other mechanisms within my body that were being impacted by the fact that my period was missing. And that was like one symptom of a broader ecosystem of issues that were being caused by this condition, which is called REDS. And the reason that it's really common in aesthetic sports is due to the pressure that we experience to try to maintain certain body standards or to try to maintain a performance recommendation, or even like, some cheerleading, depending on the coach, depending on the culture, there could be very explicit standards in terms of what you have to meet from like a body composition or from a weight standpoint. And those types of pressures can impact how women are fueling. And when we are performing at such a high level athletically, it can cause our hormones to be disrupted. And when I talk about the other systematic impacts of this downregulation that our system's going through, it's actually impacting our body's ability to train and to adapt and to recover. And so our performance is actually being impacted. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is like our bone health gets kind of diminished and weakened. And this is something that isn't just something that would impact you in like 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. It's something that can impact your risk of injury in the sport you're doing at the moment. And I think that one thing that's super interesting about cheerleading is like it can be a super dangerous sport. And so I think that this is an issue that I am really, really, really passionate about, especially for this population, just because of how many injuries it could prevent, which, depending on how long your career is, if it takes you out and you're not in for a season or you're not in for several months, that can have a huge impact on your career. And I think that sometimes we don't tie together some of these factors like, oh, my hormonal health is actually signaling something to me about my performance or my training or about my injury risk or even about my mood and my energy levels and my emotional state and my cognition and like other things that, at least when I was going through it, I never tied these things together. But in hindsight, it was actually really clear how systemic this issue was.
Wow. When I hear that, I think about just dancers and cheerleaders in general that we're pretty we're overachievers, I'll say. Like we're pretty ambitious and we want to look our best in uniform. We want to feel our best. And what comes with that is exercise and fitness. So like I feel like there's a lot of instances where we can feel like we're overdoing it, especially when we're trying to go out for like an audition or something and we are wanting to give our best and look our best. But how do you know if you're overtraining? Like you want to like work your hardest, but is working too hard an issue? Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
No, it's such a good question. And I think it's really interesting because studies have shown that perfectionism increases your risk of experiencing this. And to your point, a lot of times the women that are really successful in a sport like dance or a sport like cheerleading are going to be at heightened risk because they thrive. Like people who are really good tend to be perfectionists because of how, I think back to like the times that we were drilling routines and it's like the things that we would be thinking about or picking apart in a lot of other sports, like you would never consider these tiny little, you know, head placement, like where, like all these little detail oriented pieces. And I think that that can be what makes performance oriented athletes like really, really incredible. And of course, not all of them are perfectionists, but for the ones who are, that can also increase your risk of experiencing something like this, especially because to your point, when we're really hyper disciplined, it's easier to fall into these cycles where we're like, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And that just means doing more. And it always means doing more. And I think that that kind of bleeds into the question around overtraining, which is that I actually really like the term under recovered because
Mm.
I think that a lot of times we can fall into the trap of thinking like, oh, well, there are, Olympians doing these like crazy amount of training hours for like, let's say, anyone from like an ultra marathoner to like Ironman participants to various Olympians that are doing like 2, 3 a days.
Mm.
That is like, okay, well, if they're training at that output level, then how could I possibly be overtraining? And I think that that's an easy fallacy for us to fall in, which is that the reason that it's a cycle is because if we are actually in states where we are in an energy deficiency, which means that we're underfueled essentially. And we can talk a little bit more about what that kind of the principles that break that down. But what can happen is because it's impacting our body's ability to recover, then it's way easier to get into a state where we are under recovered. And when we are under recovered, that's kind of what they mean when they use the term overtrained, which just means that your body isn't recovering enough between sessions or within sessions to actually be able to adapt really productively and effectively from training blocks.
Mm.
And that there's, kind of various states and various flavors of what this can look like. But a lot of the times, one of the earlier signs that are going to show up if you are under recovered are going to be things like your mood might start to slip or your sleep might start to get really disrupted. And there are these really, really subtle factors that can start to indicate, oh, actually, your body probably is craving a little bit more recovery. And recovery could look like it might need a little bit more nutrition. It could look like, oh, we're actually foregoing rest when our body is needing it, or we're pushing through when actually our body is signaling that it can't adapt appropriately to the load that we're putting it under.
So rest is super important, but how do you balance the
Yeah.
rest with staying in tip-top shape
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
perform well?
It's so funny that you say that because I think that for a long time, I definitely fell into this trap where I was like, okay, well, a lot of the times that we see online, it's like elite disciplined athletic people are not taking days off. Like, that's what it means to be at
No
your
days off.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And I think that it took me a long time to learn that rest and recovery is part of being an elite, being at your best, being able to perform at your best. And like, I guess like the most simplistic way of looking at this would be if you were to do a really, really, really hard session, then the next day your muscles are recovering, they're trying to repair. They need some time to do that. And you're probably experiencing some fatigue or soreness or achiness or something into your body that's indicating to you, like, oh, I went really, really hard yesterday. And those are the types of signals that help us understand that, okay, in order for us to adapt to that session appropriately, if I were to go in and do another really, really hard session today, where my muscles are already fatigued and I'm trying to then stack that, am I actually improving my body's capacity? Am I actually adapting effectively to this training session? Am I bringing my all into what this training session is? And I think that if we kind of look at it that way, where it's like, okay, well, the rest could actually allow us to recover, allow us to repair, allow us to adapt, reduce the fatigue. And then we can go into a session where now our capacity is increased
Yeah.
and the fatigue is reduced. So our overall performance is going to improve. It's like a very acute instance where we're using that rest, we're using that recovery really strategically. And it's actually encouraging us to be able to adapt more effectively to what we're doing in our training. I think what's interesting about cheerleading, especially, is like oftentimes you're on a team and you have a coach and there's practices and there's structure around it. And so there is to some extent, there is not as much autonomy in terms of what your own training programming might look like or what your demands could be. And I think that that can make it easy to not think about it, to just
Yeah.
not think about it or to feel like you don't have a choice. And maybe even like normalize something that is really, really, really high output or something that actually is accruing a lot of fatigue. And it was interesting because looking back on my cheerleading, like there were definitely moments early in my career where I was really frustrated why I wasn't hitting performance outcomes that I thought that I should be able to do based on how I had done previously, like let's say a few days before or like a
Yeah.
week before, like not like clearly like recently. And looking back, it's like, oh, that was super obvious. It's because it wasn't that I had like lost fitness over a few days. It was that I had accumulated fatigue and I hadn't allowed for a proper recovery. And so my body wasn't ever set up to perform optimally. And I wouldn't match those patterns in my brain. But I was pushing through and I was like, okay, well, we need to get to this outcome, get to this performance. I'm just going to drill because that's what it means to be better and to get to what it takes. And so, if anything, I was trying to like quote unquote fix these performance plateaus with training more, which is like
Yeah.
the cycle that we can fall into. Like, oh, discipline means more training. So I'm going to train more when I'm not getting the outcome that I want. And in reality, it was actually making it harder for me to get the outcome that I was after. So it can
Yeah.
feel really counterintuitive, but um, it's definitely something that, you can experience very viscerally in cheerleading when it's like, did I literally achieve, like, did I hit this thing? Was I able to accomplish this, whatever it was, like this stunt or like this specific, pass or whatever it is that you're doing? And there were times where I would drill it in and not understand why I couldn't hit it if I felt like I was capable. And then to
Yeah.
realize like, oh, yeah, it's actually in hindsight, that, that, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I also think about like how that can connect to your mental because if you're drilling, you might psych yourself out and not let your body take over, like your muscle memory take over. And I think about like in a dance routine or a cheerleading routine, 9 times out of 10, you know what the routine is, but you get so like the nerves come up and then you start second guessing yourself like, do I know this routine? And then you get out there, even though like maybe you've done the routine 100 times, you
Mhm.
like are overthinking things. So I have to guess that anxiety plays some type of role in this condition and just overthinking in your mental capacity as well as the physical too.
Yeah, it's such a good point because one of the things that can happen when you are in an energy deficiency is that essentially it impacts your mood and your emotional regulation and your cognition, which can cause things like brain fog or irritability, but it can also actually impact, to your point, like anxiety and stress. So,
Mm,
one of the things that's kind of tricky about it is that your brain starts to trick you into feeling like you might want more control, especially for somebody who's already hyper disciplined or for
yeah.
somebody who's already a perfectionist. Then it's easy for us to fall into the pattern of like, oh, an example could be with nutrition. Like maybe I'm very rigid with how I'm approaching this diet that have come to believe is what is going to be the most supportive for my athleticism or for the, body comp criteria that I have for myself or whatever it is. And then because we're getting into a state where our body now feels like it's in a heightened kind of high stress, almost like it's essentially your body's in survival mode. So when we're in survival mode, it's like heightened alert. And when we're in that heightened alert, heightened anxiety state, and I will be the first to say that like I'm definitely somebody that tends to be more like high stress, like really high expectations.
Mhm.
And so to exacerbate that in any way is something that is not going to be very helpful for me. Like I think that
Yeah.
it's going to really really spiral. And I think that that is where we can get really tripped up, which is like to your point, then you have this mental state where there's somebody who already probably biases towards like, okay, if I want this certain outcome, what can I control? What more can I do? And I
Mm,
think that we can often then have a bias towards like doing more, controlling more. And I think that that can also feed into this overall ecosystem cycle of like, we're actually just getting into a more extreme state of these, like either we're not recovered sufficiently or we're not fueling sufficiently because we're really, really doubling in on the behaviors that we think are giving us that sense of control, essentially.
mhm. Yeah, it's so fascinating, and I feel like nobody is really talking about this. Like, it's such a interesting phenomenon to me, at least. So, I also wanna go back to something that you said earlier about, like, the rest and recovery part of it, and something that I recognize that I do or did was when I was starting to weight lift, I started getting really into it, and, like, if I missed, like, leg day 1 week, I would be like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta make up leg day." But, like, since I've been an NBA dancer, I'm a current NBA dancer, and my schedule is busy. Like, we have a lot of games, we have practices, so I
Yeah.
can't work out like I used to
Yeah.
when I took a break from dance. Really, really didn't take a break from dance, but, like, pro dance every week and dancing and performing. I found myself like, I went to the gym this week, and I did leg day, and I feel like I started even heavier than I normally would, and
Hmm.
I kinda felt even stronger because I had taken so much time off, and I guess my muscles had time to rest and recover, like, when I came back, I was able to do a heavier weight, and I felt stronger. It felt like I had been doing it every week, but I hadn't, and I just thought that was interesting how you can come back how I felt like I was stronger in that moment because I had some rest.
Yeah. I think that's a really perfect example where a lot of times our fitness is a lot more resilient than we give it credit for. And it's easy to lose that trust and feel like, okay, well, I need to check every single one of these boxes in order to be at my optimal, even if we've never really fully proven that those are all the boxes that actually make sense.
Mm,
And I think that, a really good example of this is that, well, what you just said, which is like, there are instances where we are way more resilient. We can take time off and that might actually result in us being able to produce a better outcome because our body really was, grateful for that time off. It gave us more time to adapt. And
yeah.
it's also about that trust that we can then build, which is that like, hey, something came up or I was feeling a certain way and I had permission to not do that thing that I thought that I was going to do. And I can trust that my body isn't going to just throw its hands up and get rid of all of the fitness that I have drilled. I mean, you've been doing this for years, right? Like it's drilled into your person. Like a few days off is not going to be something that's going to make or break what your overall performance is going to look like. And
Yeah.
I think that building up that trust can be a really, really, really powerful skill, if you will, that allows us to understand that flexibility and kind of what I alluded to earlier, which is like, I think that it's easy for us to dismiss how much our body accumulates some of the stressors that we put it under. And a really obvious example of this, well, actually, I use the word obvious, but it was not obvious to me several years ago. Um, no judgment at all if that is the same for you. Uh, but one really huge correlation is sleep. So if we were to not get that much sleep the night before and then wake up and do a training session, I mean, studies are very clearly indicating that that significantly increases your risk of injury. Just the fact that you didn't
Yeah.
sleep well that night before. And it's an example of how our body is accumulating stressors so that when we think about, okay, how did I sleep before? We might make like the night before, I might make an adjustment to what I'm doing that day or the choices that I'm making or how I'm showing up for a session or a practice or whatever it is as a result of some of these other factors that are going to impact us in our general lives. And I think that the more that we can try to bring awareness to tying those pieces together, the more we can get ahead of some of these patterns. And I think for me, that was really tricky because training was also something that I love to do. And I've always been really active outside of just what I was doing in my cheerleading career. And so it was really easy for me to use training as a coping mechanism and to feel like, okay, I'm feeling like stressed, I'm feeling whatever, anxious, anything. And I am going to use that training session to like help work through that or just feel better or whatever it was. And I think that that can be a dangerous pattern to fall into when it is our only coping mechanism because it's a really, really vulnerable position where we're constantly just stacking stressors. And the stress that we put on our body for our training sessions should be really helpful. Like that's the whole point of doing the training session is to put our bodies under stress so that we can adapt. But if we're not setting it up for success, we're not allowing it to adapt from the session, and or we're just stacking a bunch of stress that's accumulated from all the various from the diet that we have, from the things that are going on in our life, from the sleep disruptions that we're experiencing, and then we're still forcing through the workout or we feel like we have to. I think that that is what can lead us into these like really vulnerable patterns.
So you saying that got me realizing something, two things. There's a lot of like workout classes that I feel like push you to the limit. I think of, I don't want to, there's one that I'm thinking of, starts with a B,
Yep. Yeah, I think I have the same one in mind.
but
Shall not be
they,
named.
right, we won't name them, but they like push you, like go, 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 go. And I feel like there's no rest in the class.
Hmm.
And it just made me think about like, okay, then what is the perfect fitness routine? Maybe not perfect, but like what would be the ideal fitness routine for somebody? Is it like something like that once a week or every 2 weeks? Is it combined with weight training? Like, but also you have to think about, okay, what works best for my body? So like to all of your points, what do you think is the ideal training schedule and like what should you do?
Yeah. It so much depends. It so much depends on what your goals are, and it so much depends on what you're training for. I mean, there are just like exercise guidelines that they have done in studies in terms of what they would recommend for the general population to be doing in
Okay.
terms of doing multiple strength sessions a week and doing, at least 30-ish minutes of some form of walking movement, kind of gentle cardio of your choosing every single day. But I think that at the end of the day, there's a lot more weight that we're going to place on specificity, which is like if you are a professional dancer, then what your ideal training block is going to look like is going to be so specific to which seasons you're on, when your performances are, what your work schedule looks like,
Mhm.
what you do for a living, what you enjoy, what you need to be able to do within your own performance. And that's going to be very, very different from the ideal training structure that's going to be for a someone who's training for half marathon marathons on a regular basis and or trying to really hit this certain PR on a specific marathon that they're trying to do. And so I think there's also not enough weight placed on what you enjoy and like what your goals are and how that's going to fit in. And I think that that plays a lot more into what your ideal is going to look like than just like the overall generalized. I guess I will say when it comes to one thing that I will say is like with some of these classes of any kind, one of the pitfalls that's really easy to fall into, especially when we're really busy, is this idea that, oh, I don't have that much time to work out. And so therefore, when I do, I need it to be the most intense,
Mm,
efficient workout because I only have a short amount of time and I want to just go as crazy as I can during that
okay.
specific time window, almost like because of that time scarcity element. And I think that that is one of the most underrated patterns that can actually lead to us being in this like state of not really ever being recovered enough or like kind of overdoing what we end up doing. And I guess an extreme version of this could be like if we were to do that class once a day, every single day, non negotiable, where we were really, really high intensity and there was not any recovery that was being incorporated or programmed into the class or the class structure, that one thing that's worth considering is just when it comes to your own programming, how you're experiencing the adaptations to some of these classes or these programs where it can be really, really great for us to use structure that is being given to us from another entity or whatever it is. But I think that ideally we're incorporating into that some level of variety or some level of rest or just thinking about how we are managing all those different factors. And sometimes that's not going to be inherent when, for example, if there's like a specific class that you're taking where they don't assume that everyone is going to come there once or twice a day, every single day, or stacked back to back to back to back. And so thinking about the overall programming of like, well, what does my general week look like? How does this fit into what a month looks like? How do I notice that my body feels after I do the same thing 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row? And that can be something that's really helpful.
Yeah. Kinda it makes me think about maybe that's why Pilates is so popular these days is because it's especially for dancers. I know a lot of my dance friends do Pilates or they teach it or they're getting certified and they wanna teach it, but it feels like I mean, it is low impact, but I was surprised in one Pilates class that I sweat as much as I did because I love to sweat, and I do, like, I used to really love those really intense hit classes because I was like, I go in there, you know, giving it my all. I'm not stopping. I come out, I'm dripping in sweat. I feel like I did something. But maybe that was great in my 20s, but like, not sustainable once I'm getting older. So, yeah, so I think low impact workouts, I mean, you can probably confirm or deny, but I think that's maybe why Pilates is so popular these days.
I think it's also interesting what you said about what counts as a workout, because I think that that mentality is going to matter a lot in terms of what we choose to do. I can say that in my own experience, similar to you, maybe it wasn't as much like the sweat, but I loved the challenge. I loved the challenge. I loved the feeling challenged. I loved the idea that I was like exploring my limits. Like that was a really addictive experience for me in my training that I felt like I wasn't getting from every single aspect of my life, like rightfully so. And I think that that also made the criteria for what seemed like an effective workout would bias me towards ultimately measuring my level of fatigue, which was like, did I feel like I hit this level of fatigue that was really challenging for me? And it was when I started to be really strategic of like, this is the workout where I am going to really lean into what is really challenging because I feel fresh and because that's the purpose that I want to be focused on here and I have some time to recover. And then there were other workouts where I was like, okay, well, this is going to be not going to be the workout where I'm going to try to maximize the challenge that I experience and the amount of fatigue that I'm accumulating, because that might actually be the wrong signal to measure if I'm trying to do that every single day. And so I think and maybe like another interesting component to it. That didn't directly answer your question about Pilates. I think that
Yeah.
Pilates is I love that you mentioned that a lot of your dancer friends are doing that. I've noticed that pattern as well because there's tends to be kind of this like choreo based
Mm.
aspect of it. So people with like a dance history like myself, like, I think that's really cool to have in workout modalities because I am drawn to that kind of structure and drawn to that kind of precision, which I think is really important in Pilates is like the precision aspect. So maybe there is something about your communities that are also attracted to that. But of course, like Pilates is huge in terms of having a moment right now. So
Yeah.
it's great that women are being active in that way. And I think that it also draws attention, I think, to me, at least to the fact that one thing that I struggled with when I was in cheer is that I, come from a family where my family is
Mm.
extremely athletic. They're like runners, surfers, lacrosse, swimmers, like doing all of like very intense conventional sports. And for a long time for me, I was into dance and I was into cheerleading. And I didn't identify as an athlete in the same way that I would think of as like a soccer player or as somebody in like a more conventional sports realm. And I think that that also impacts how we decide that we need to think about things like sports nutrition or things like how we're treating our bodies, how we're building training and training blocks. And whether you're a dancer or a cheerleader or you're doing Pilates on the regular, whatever it is, I think that one of the things that and especially I see this in women, but across the board, is that folks, we are athletes and we need to be treating our bodies like we're athletes. And I think that even, regardless of what it is that you're doing, if you're moving your body with intention, we can really broaden the definition of what constitutes an athlete and therefore what decisions we make around what we need in order to support our lifestyle and what we need to do in order to support the activity that we're doing.
Yeah. Wow, such great points. So, if you were going through an audition or you had a game day, how would you fuel your body the night before, the day of, and maybe even after? Like what would you do?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things to keep in mind is I'll answer that question directly. But also, I think that one of the most important things to keep in mind is that, like, what we do every single day is going to impact what happens also in that like 4-hour window. So if our body's coming out from like, well, our day-to-day routine is like chaotic, or our day-to-day routine is like sometimes we're getting enough, sometimes we're not getting enough, and then we're like feeling really out of control, snacking at the end of the day. So then like what we do in that 24-hour period is going to be impacted by the accumulation of what we're doing in terms of all of those micro decisions leading up to it. But I
Mm,
think that some of the most underrated principles that we can keep in mind when it comes to game day, which tends to be, depending on the sport, but it tends to be a longer period of time where we are either on for the entire time or we're at least visible, like having to be somewhat performative, or we're going into blocks of performance or we're going on and then maybe we're coming off court, like for basketball, for example, that we should be fueling that session like it is an athletic event. So we would be fueling beforehand. We would be thinking about our nutrition during that game. And I think that this is where culture can come into it a lot because if the team isn't having anything, then I think it can feel like a lot of pressure, just feel off to be doing something different than what everyone else is doing. But ideally, we would be having something regularly throughout that game, depending on what we're doing during that period of time. Will depend on like how much and when, but we'd be thinking about that strategy and then we'd be having something after too.
mm,
And especially for these longer periods, like I know for me, for football season, we would be out and like would not have access to like go and have a meaningful snack for like long periods of time and be either standing or moving or like doing some sort of choreo for that essentially that entire like quarter, whatever it was. And so then starting to think through like, what are we putting in our bottles for hydration? For the instances that we can get in a little sip of water, that might be a strategy, especially if you're like under the heat or if you're freezing cold, like those factors are going to impact it. And so maybe instead of like us having a huge snack or whatever, we're going to have something bigger beforehand. We're going to put something in our water bottle that's going to give us and sustain us with some of that energy. And then we're going to bring snacks that we can have whenever we have those breaks and take advantage of that time, even if we're not feeling hungry, knowing that that's going to be what allows us to keep going. And I think that especially for, sports that we have to be on, like we cannot, the margin of error in terms of our abilities to mess up or like what the stakes are if we were to mess up are high. We don't want to risk getting into those situations where our tank is empty and we're running on fumes in order to perform in the way that we are. And I think it's also interesting just to think about how we're fueling the practices beforehand that we're doing and drilling that same routine in comparison to how we're doing it on game day. Because
Yeah.
if we're used to practicing with, because we have a shorter practice window or we usually have dinner right beforehand, and then on game day, we're in like hour 3 and we haven't had anything. And then that's when we're doing the actual performance, or like maybe the auditions are super long. So we went a long period of time. That's also going to impact what your body is working with when you're doing that performance relative to what it was practicing on. And I think that that's also something to keep in mind and to consider where we want to practice our nutrition while we'd practice the routine. We'd
Mm.
want to practice it so that when we're actually under the lights or in the performance like setting or at an audition, we understand those principles that are going to allow us to be at our top performance. And I think that the more that we think about that being a strategy that fuels that top performance versus being like this optional thing that's just sort of tangential to what we're doing, that is evidence based. Like the fact that if you are fueling appropriately, more and more studies are demonstrating how that is predictive, meaning your ability to be either in an energy deficiency versus in a more optimal energy availability state is predictive of your performance. And so
Mm.
I think that the more that we think about these fueling tactics as part of our ability to perform at our top, the more that we might prioritize them effectively. And also the more that we might pay attention to some of these earlier warning signs, and the more that you might prioritize some of these principles that might feel kind of counterintuitive, especially for women or people in general, athletes in general, where that aesthetic piece is something that kind of stays top in mind and
Mm.
stays like a either hidden or very explicit pressure in terms of how we navigate our body, how we navigate our food, how we navigate our overall lifestyle.
Yeah. Especially in aesthetic-based sports. Early on, when I became a pro dancer, when I was an NFL cheerleader, during my training for the audition and even during the season, I would stay away from bread. And I thought bread would make me bloated or it would not be the best for my body. And I was trying to look my best in my uniforms. Specifically, I want to ask you about bread. What's the deal with bread? Because I feel like it's not only me. It's like my friends, they would not eat bread because
Yeah.
they think it would make them, I use the F
Yes.
word, fat. So, like, what's the deal with bread? Should we I know we probably shouldn't remove it completely, but what are your thoughts on that? Are there any other foods that we should remove completely?
It's so funny because you laugh, but like it's so real. It's like bread gets
It
such
sounds
a bad
ridiculous.
rep. I feel like whoever is the PR for protein right now is just like they're killing it. They're hitting it out of the park. And the PR reps for bread are not they're not hitting the mark. And I will say that from my own experience, I was similar to you. I was like, should I be having bread like every day? Is that too much? Should I have it more than once a
Right.
day? That seems like it's definitely too much. Bagel seems like it's like 8 slices of bread. I don't even know how that came into being a thing. So I think that one of the things to keep in mind, so bread is essentially a carb, right? And carbs, I think broader lens can get a really, really bad rap because of, to your point, how in a lot of the kind of the diet culture, nutrition pseudoscience can sometimes be like, okay, well, eating carbohydrates leads to weight gain and you can't be lean if you're eating a lot of carbs. And I think that what that can lead to is athletes under eating carbs, which then is going to negatively impact your performance. I think that this was a huge shift that I learned really late because I became an endurance athlete and got really into running and still was like demonizing carbs, which is like really, really bizarre. But truthfully, carbs are going to be necessary for strength-based activities. There's definitely a cardiovascular element to dance, as you know. And I think that the more that we're demonizing carbs, the more that we're actually inhibiting our bodies from getting a really flexible and readily availability energy source that it relies on. And for women especially, women are sensitive to low carbohydrate states in our body. So essentially, if we're just under eating carbohydrates, but we're eating enough of all the other things, like we're eating enough calories in the day, we're eating enough protein, whatever it is. If we're under eating carbs, our body can interpret that as being an energy deficiency state,
Mm.
even though we might be eating enough calories when if you were to count everything up by the end of the day. And our hormones are very sensitive to that, which means
Mm.
that we might start experiencing some of these downregulated hormones if we are cutting out or really demonizing carbs.
Mm.
So it's kind of my case for there's definitely a use case for bread, and bread can be a really valuable part of our diet, and it can be something that is really, really helpful, especially for active women to have the option to include that. It can be an amazing pre-workout, post-workout, an amazing option to incorporate into a really, really well-balanced, like what I like to call like a performance plate, which is essentially helping you build plates that are going to support your performance as a female athlete. And I think that the more that we can shine a light on some of those narratives that you're mentioning, where we have those biases of like, oh,
Mhm.
I was taught that this thing is really bad, or I was taught that I shouldn't do this thing, or I should stay away from this thing, or I should restrict this thing. And that being able to just identify some of those patterns of those biases can be really, really, really powerful and helpful in the process. And I find that during recovery, that is a lot of the work, to your point on like the mental aspect, is that
Mhm.
a lot of the work is starting to become self-aware of what are those things and are they true for us? Like if I were to think about what is relevant for me, my demographic, my activity level, my goals, is that actually true? Does that help me? Does that make sense?
Right.
And I think that that's where I was realizing I was getting tripped up a lot, which is that, yeah, I might have heard something I was doing based on someone recommending it somewhere online or otherwise, and thinking this, therefore it makes sense for me. And realizing over time that actually that the accumulation of those behaviors is what led me down a path that was very much not serving me for my performance, for my overall well-being, my longevity, like kind of like however you measured it, it just wasn't really conducive to me. And I think that unlearning some of those behaviors can be really, really valuable and important part of the process.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because dance and cheer is like one of the only sports where your appearance matters kind of equal to the actual performance of what you're doing, like the dance part. If I'm a football player, I don't have to really think about smiling when the camera comes around or making sure that my lipstick's not on my teeth. It's just part of that. We go back to the mental part of it too. And it's just so hard because it seems like, yeah, I have to eat this bread to do my job, but I don't have to, but it would be great if I ate this bread to do my job, but I also want to look good. And it's so interesting how dance and cheerleading has that nuance because you are being judged for how you look, but also how you perform, whereas other athletes don't really have to worry about how they look. So there's that added element of perfectionism.
I get it. Yeah. And I think that's why it's so prevalent and normalized and not talked about, is because I think that we've kind of accepted that maybe this is just like this is the price. This is the price that we pay. And I think starting to rewrite some of those narratives, because to your point, you are also, you care about your performance and you care about your body's capabilities and what they're going to do. And I think that some of these fears of what is going to happen if I do this thing, and drawing awareness to that, like, is it that you are going to look bad? Is it that we're not going to be able to fit in uniform? Is it that we are going to feel a certain way about our bodies? And I think that that is a perfect example of where we could examine, like, is that really true? And is that really what is going to happen? And I think that it's also worth mentioning that, to kind of going back to my point around being athletes, is that at the end of the day, we want our body to be able to build and support lean muscle mass. I think that is one of the huge goals of being a cheerleader or being a dancer, like being in this realm. And part of building lean muscle involves your body having what it needs to be able to do that. And when our body goes into survival mode, what actually happens is that it biases more towards survival. And in doing so, it's going to start biasing towards storing fat, ironically, because muscle is very expensive to maintain. It's a very metabolically expensive part and system within our body. And so, what is happening and why I think that interestingly, one of the symptoms can be digestive issues. And I mentioned your period is definitely one, but that is one of the more severe ones. And the reality is, a lot of women are on hormonal contraceptive or some sort of contraceptive, or maybe they're getting a bleed, but it might be anovulatory. Like there's such a huge spectrum in terms of the hormonal piece. But some of the other symptoms could be things like digestive issues. And some of those digestive issues could be things like bloating. And bloating is it's an aesthetic thing that happens and that you can literally see. And I think that one of the unfortunate things is like, well, what's happening is when our body is downregulated, it's slowing down on our digestive system. It might even be breaking down some of the muscle, even within our digestive tract, which is impacting our body's ability to like move food through our system. It can actually cause and exacerbate some of these digestive issues. And unfortunately, because some of the female athletes might end up going to somebody like a provider who isn't super educated about this type of issue, then they might get advice or see something online or like be Googling about inflammation or whatever it is and see something like, okay, now what you should do is you need to cut out bread, cut out gluten, cut out dairy, try to do low FODMAP or whatever it is in terms of controlling your food in order to address the symptoms that you're experiencing. And ironically, that is actually then driving us to exacerbate what we were experiencing before and the mechanisms that were contributing to it if it was coming down to this situation with reds. And it's a really, really, really common pattern that I unfortunately see a lot of the female athletes falling into. And I think that kind of goes also back to this thing around control and around mindset, which is like, yeah, it's easy for me to train more when I feel like I don't get the outcomes. And it's easier for me to cut something out because I feel like I'm in control of the symptoms than it is for me to do something really counterintuitive, which is like, why would eating more ever help my bloating go away? But we have to remember that bloating is not immediate fat gain. And some of these physiological mechanisms are our body's natural reaction to being in a prolonged survival state. And so
Exactly.
I think that is just, it's very, very hard it's sometimes very hard for us to get to the point where we can unlearn enough of these patterns to really buy into what is going to be supportive. And I think that that's why this is so prevalent in aesthetic sports.
Yeah, such a good point. Like our bodies are changing all the time, every day.
Hmm.
Might be one weight in the morning than you are in the evening,
100%.
the next day and the next day. So it fluctuates. So it's definitely natural. So tell us about your program for athletic health recovery.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a program that I did in collaboration with a lot of different specialists, and it was really inspired by a lot of the struggles that I had in my own experience and journey, where as we kind of have started to talk through, there are a lot of different angles that this type of issue can touch into. And so for me, it kind of felt like a lot of the approaches that I was experiencing were like at best siloed, or at worst, like there was just a lot of misinformation that didn't seem super clear. Where maybe one provider would be like, oh, you're fine, like just go on the pill. And then another provider would be like, well, you're not trying to get pregnant right now, so it's a convenience. And then maybe another provider might like hand me a meal plan. And it just felt really, really disjointed. And we weren't tying together a lot of the pieces. And I wasn't, and like, I felt like it was hard to find people that were helping me through, like, okay, well, how does my motivation as an athlete show up in relation to, recovery and rest and nutrition and my beliefs around food? And so there's like the psychological component, there's a nutrition component, there's a training component, there's also like the body systematic component. And really tying all those together felt really difficult. And so what I ended up doing was I became really passionate about this topic. And this might be kind of representative of the perfectionist mindset that I can fall into really easily, but it kind of resulted in me then seeking out a collaboration and partnership with other researchers or clinicians that were really specialized on this specific subject area and this niche, which is like, is the information kind of alluding to what I was talking about earlier, which is like, what is the actual credible evidence-based recommendations for this demographic? Because it's not always that that's not usually what's being spoken to when we just see generalized content online or in some random generalist population podcasts. And so I essentially consolidated together with the collaboration of my clinical partners and collaborators this program. And it touches all of these different aspects: the nutrition aspect, the training aspect, the psychological aspect, all the lifestyle factors that are all interplaying together in order to support women through focusing on what really, really, really does matter and create step function improvement in terms of their performance and in terms of their own goals. And for many, that might look like we are focusing on period recovery, but it also could look like we're focusing on creating, to your point, like that ideal, optimal scheduling around your auditions that are coming up, around not having to question what that game day formula looks like for you and what you need on the other days based on your own schedule that fits in these principles that invest in your hormone health, they invest in your metabolic health, and they invest in your fitness as a female athlete. And it takes us through that, and it essentially takes all of this, studies, research, what the experts are saying, it consolidates it, and it gives it the opportunity to individualize this and bring this to the woman that would really benefit.
Wow, that's amazing. I feel like I've never really heard anything like that, so that's awesome. I do wanna, ask you, based off of your cheer experience, you cheered in high school, and then you went to college and cheered in college. Where'd you cheer in college at again?
I cheered at Cal or
Cal.
Berkeley.
Yeah. So, what was the biggest change going from high school to college? And did you notice any changes, like major changes? I think that's when you were in college is when you found out the Reds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I think that one of the biggest changes was um the culture. The culture was one of the biggest changes, interestingly. And I don't think that I fully acknowledged it when I was going through it. But it's going to be kind of inevitable, right? The coach is different, the program is different, the expectations are different, and the team is different. And so I was really, really grateful where my high school program, I had actually chosen the high school program over doing something else I could have done. I was highly considering doing cross country and track, but I really had to make a decision because that's football season, that's basketball season. Like it's such a huge commitment to do cheerleading. It's typically like you're committed to it in some capacity year round. And so I chose cheerleading in high school because the program and the coach were known for being like one of the most transformative, really, really highly recommended experiences and programs within the school that I was at, which was like a kind of like athletically oriented, conventional football type of school. Maybe not like the South. I was in California, but at least what I would imagine it to be. I'm sure some people's experiences are likely incredibly more intense. And then when I went to college, I loved the performance aspect. So then I tried out and ended up doing cheerleading in college. I think that the shift in focus was so subtle, but really, really, really impactful. And I think that this also highlights like how small little changes can have really, really, really big impacts that we might not realize. So a really small example of this was like the uniform. The uniform was different. And it just so happened that the uniform in college just was a little bit less forgiving. Not even that much more like unforgiving, but like it was just a little bit less forgiving than my high school uniform. And that in combination with the fact that we were doing a lot of more advanced stunts, which would allowed us to do multi-layer pyramids and stuff in college, which you literally can't really like legally do in high school. at least at the time that I was there. And that also changes in terms of your weight, in terms of whether or not you're going to be like what layer you're going to be on, in terms of if you're small enough to do that. I know in one of your other podcasts, you guys were talking about like, yeah, just the pressure of like being a flyer or not being a flyer. And like, it's just a whole different thing to be like thinking about. And it was definitely something that was a change and a shift in college. And then you really did feel like an ambassador to the school when you were in college. So we would go to a lot of events where we weren't even performing. We were just there purely to do hair and makeup, put on the uniform and show up, and then maybe smile, look at the camera, maybe interface with some alumni. And I think that that also kind of shifts what you think matters about what your expectations are on being on the squad, where, in high school, we didn't really have to do that. And like, of course, like we were aware that we had to do certain things to like look a certain way. But in college, it was a lot more specific. And like, I remember there were times where I didn't clear like I had to learn how to do my makeup properly to fit the standards that they had. And I think it was such an honor to like and a privilege to represent the school in that capacity because it's in a university that really does focus so much on alumni and community in that way. And I think that it was still on the spectrum of things. Like I was so grateful that I never got like we didn't have weigh-ins. We didn't have like I've just heard absolute horror stories. I was like, I swear you made that up. Like that's got to be crazy toxic in terms of what people are doing to measure or to very explicitly track and monitor their team's bodies and what they're expecting. And I was really grateful that that wasn't the case. But I did notice some of these shifts that I guess in combination with the pressure probably of just being in the collegiate environment in general, and to your point on like being really, really busy. And I think that for a lot of folks in cheer, it's like, yeah, this is something that we're dedicating so much of ourselves to. But at the end of the day, it's one of many things that we're dedicating ourselves to. And so we're balancing this against a busy schedule, against a lot of other things. For me, it was like there was tons of classes that were really, really high pressure. And this was supposed to be like a sliver of all of the other things that I was focusing on. And so it's just a completely different ecosystem. And I think that a lot of what your experience comes down to, at least from what I have experienced and heard about from other colleagues and peers, is just like it so much comes down to like who is influential on the team and who
Yeah.
is the coach and what do they do and what do they say and how do they structure auditions and how do they structure practice and what do they reward. And I think that a lot of those like really, really subtle things can have such a huge difference. And so
Yeah.
I also think that like where there are coaches that can bring more priority or bring more influence into some of these behaviors or some of these priorities because they care about the performance of their athletes or they care about the longevity of their athletes, that can also have a invaluable impact on not just like their experience on the squad, but like their entire lives from what I've
Absolutely.
seen. That was pretty high level. I mean, I could talk about some of the technical difficulty, like differences, but that was like an experiential difference, I would say, between the two.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. And to your point, yeah, the coach has so much to do with how you see yourself in different aspects of your life, like how you see your body. I hear women who have kids after being a pro dancer, and they're like, oh my gosh, like it was so hard for me to feel myself again and get back into my body because of the pressures I had as a pro dancer. And I didn't want to, that part of me kind of brought up so many thoughts and insecurities. So yeah, that's very interesting, but it's so true.
Yeah.
So I want to get into some rapid fire,
Okay. Yeah. Let's do
and
it.
yeah, so I want to know what's your favorite cheat meal?
Cheat meal? Like, as in a meal that's like indulgent or,
Yeah, indulgent.
I mean, okay. So I don't really have cheat meals because I just kind of like, not because I don't ever cheat, but just because I don't really like diet, I guess. So I don't really have rules. So my favorite meal probably generally would be sushi.
Ooh,
I love sushi. And like,
so
it doesn't even
good.
have to be like a nice omakase. Like, I probably shouldn't be disclosing this, but it doesn't even have to be a nice omakase. Like, as long as the fish is good, I am like decently good, I will eat a very wide variety of sushi. But yeah, it's kind of amazing because when I recently went to Japan, it's just like heaven there because pretty much wherever you go, there's just such good fish and got such good quality sushi that's very normalized. Like you can literally just get it like in the grocery store.
Yeah,
But
I've heard
yeah,
that.
I gotta say,
I've never been to Japan, but I need to go one day, and
yeah.
I feel like that's not really a cheat meal though, because it's so light, but it's filling, but it can be healthy, I guess.
Well, yeah, I think it's more like from a
I love
philosophy
sushi though.
standpoint. It's interesting what like one of the mechanisms that can happen, which is I mean, this is more of a philosophical thing again, but like it's interesting because the whole idea of like a cheat meal would or like cheating is
Mm,
kind of like breaking out of like what you think is like acceptable.
right,
And when I was in that mindset where it was like there were very clear rules, like to your point, it was like I can't do the bread. Like I can only do the bread like at most once a day or whatever that was in like my brain. Then it did feel like there were certain meals that I would like crave, fixate on, like need, and it would feel so indulgent when I would have them
right.
because I wasn't allowing myself to have them on a regular basis. And then I probably would have said something crazy, what felt crazy, like restricted or create forbidden, because
Yeah,
at the time that's what it was for me. I think that's part of the work that I've put into myself, but also kind of underlines a lot of the principles of the program, which is like once you start to normalize a lot of those things, it kind of takes away the novelty. And so then what you truly, really, really enjoy can come to the surface. And I live in New York. We love bagels here. We love pizza. We love all the random things. And that's great. But to me, it's not like a cheat meal. It's like if somebody wants to go do that, we can go do that. And I also like doesn't have to carry so much weight that it feels like I'm placing some sort of novelty on that. Does that make sense?
absolutely, yeah, and I love what you said about you don't diet and you just eat what you wanna eat. I mean, everything in moderation, of course, but I think it's great that you don't put so much emphasis on, like, "I'm doing this, but I shouldn't," you know? So
Ironically, I think that it actually ends up be eating healthier in a way when we do that.
Mhm.
Because I think that we get into this fear of like, oh, well, if I just start letting myself go, then I'm never going to want to eat whatever, a salad or a vegetable again. And that was always something I believed for so long. And I think that, again, with like that trust piece, which is like, oh, well, actually, yeah, if I do have pizza every single day for every meal for a week, I'm definitely craving a salad. Like, no questions asked. I'm going to crave something different.
Yeah,
And I think that once we get into like the habits of doing that repeatedly, you start realizing, oh yeah, like it doesn't have to mean that much.
that's true, yeah,
And it like takes away how much like I think about food and how much I'm like fixated on food. It's kind of like, yeah, it can be a good thing that I really enjoy. And it also could be something that's really social. It can also be something that is
yeah,
functional. Like, but it doesn't have to mean that much. And I think that
that's
that
so
can shift a
true.
lot of these like really crazy patterns that we can fall into of binge restrict cycles or of feeling like we're thinking about it a lot or feeling like we have to do this like mental math if we suddenly have plans at the end of the day and therefore it's going to influence what we feel like all of that can take up so much headspace.
Yeah,
And I think that that is something that also has, can be a huge, huge, huge shift in terms of the control piece that we're talking about and how much that cycle is perpetuated by being in that state where we're like, oh, our body's actually not performing at an optimal level. And therefore it's seeking out this control because it's on high alert. And
yeah,
even just like that mental restriction piece can contribute to that kind of mental headspace.
yeah, that's such a good point. So, okay, what's the longest distance that you've ever ran? I know you're a marathon runner.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Is it a
have,
marathon you've done longer?
for me, it's 27.2 because I ran a marathon and then I was really late for the marathon, so I had to run to the start line,
Mm.
and they wouldn't let me get any closer than a mile from the start line. I was like, "Guys, I'm about to run a marathon. Do you think we can just get to the start line?" But I understood why they did it, and so anyways, I had to run a mile to the start line, then I ran the
Wait,
marathon.
they wouldn't let you start on the start line?
Well, so I was late, and so a lot of times when you run a marathon, you have to get bussed. Like they have all these complex logistics to like shuttle people to the start lines at certain times, and then they have all these blockages because they can't just let anybody
Yeah.
wander around the start line. And so then because I was late, someone just like drove me there, but the closest that we could get, because we weren't one of the designated shuttles, was like over a mile away. So then I had to jog the mile to the start line. At that point, you're kind of like, well, what's another mile, I guess.
Right, might as well count it. That's fascinating. What's your best running tip for form and endurance?
Ooh, running tip for form and for endurance. I think I would say that it would be to shift how your form is when your form and also your speed when the terrain changes. And so a really simple example of this would be to, oftentimes what we're thinking about when we're running is like we're thinking about keeping our chest fairly open so that we're not hunching over into a C and really curving our spine, which I actually don't usually see that dancers have that issue because posture is like always so good. But then to think about that when we're taking on a hill is that sometimes people will like lean really, really, really far into the hill to the point where we're like almost like putting the trunk of our person to like have extra weight that we're carrying up the hill. So you actually want to think about like it's almost as if a string is pulling you up from the top of your head while you're running up the hill, just to think about how you're not collapsing into it. And similarly, we would shift as if we were shifting gears on a bike, where it's like, okay, if you're going up a hill, that doesn't mean you just keep going the same exact pace you were going at, because that's going to make the hill feel way harder. So focus on what you can control, which is like, okay, let the hill do some of the work, pull back your speed. And then that's what's going to give you, so that your effort level stays the same. That's what will give you more energy to be able to continue to go after the hill versus just gassing out at the very top. So that's a really helpful thing to keep in mind from an endurance standpoint.
Yeah, so good. What's your favorite cheer move?
My favorite cheer move? I've never thought, I guess I'm not gonna say move, but I would say, like, there's all these different print like, there's, like, the cheer, and then there's, like, the stunts, and then there's the tumbling, jumps, etcetera, and for me, it was always the choreo, but, like, the dance component. So not like when we were yelling, but, like, when the music is playing and we got to do more aligned, like, closer to what y'all do at,
Mhm.
NBA.
Yeah.
That was definitely my favorite, and coming from a dance background, I loved that part of cheering, which is doing the routine and getting to dance and do those types of choreo, like, doing choreo in general was for sure my favorite.
Yeah, you get to break it down, have a dance break.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What do you think is the best cardio for dancers?
That's so interesting. It's gonna be the one that you enjoy. I think that one thing that's interesting, is going to be, like, what you're conditioned to do. So, when we think about cardio or we think about doing like high intensity training, and this kind of goes back to your thing around classes, sometimes I think that we limit it to thinking about like, oh, we just need to be like sprinting or like we need to do something specific. But actually, there's so many different ways that you can get your heart rate really, really elevated that isn't just on like sprinting outside. And in fact, sprinting outside requires a lot of, to your point, like form and thought, and like your body needs to be conditioned to be able to do that. And there's a lot of kind of things to consider when you're doing like high intensity sprinting. And so, therefore, it might be easier if you're trying to do something high intensity, do something that your body is more adapted to. And that might be assault bike. It might be a stationary bike. It might be that you're doing like the ropes or that you're doing repetitions in terms of some sort of plyometric or like repetitive movement. And I think that the more that we can expand what your body is comfortable with, that can still get your heart rate really, really elevated while maintaining proper form and proper execution is going to be the best one for dancers, because the last thing that you want is to go out and do sprints and then get injured doing sprints
Yeah.
when you're like, I'm
This is
a
not what I
dancer.
do.
Like, that's
Right.
not what I do. Like, what was the point of even doing that? So,
Yeah.
ones where we can get and that's kind of similar with the burpees. That's actually a pretty technical movement. It's like,
Mm.
yes, maybe we do that if we're very comfortable and confident in our ability to execute that motion. But maybe we do something that's more like a cycle because you can get your heart rate up really, really quickly. It's low impact. And maybe you used to take Peloton classes. And so you're semi kind of familiar with that. So I think that I would think about it a little bit more that way. I don't know if that was a super direct answer to your question,
No, it's great, and, you said burpee, I haven't done a burpee in a long time.
no judgment here. Yeah. No
Yeah, those
judgment here.
burpees will get to you. They look
That might
easy,
be,
but they are not.
I don't even know if they look easy, but you maybe you're living your best life. That
Maybe.
could be.
There's somebody in the world that loves them,
Yeah.
so more
I
power
mean,
to them.
there's gotta be something for everyone, I guess.
And also walking, I feel like, that can do a lot for you in terms of getting your heart rate up, so I feel like don't people out there, don't underestimate the power of walking and taking a walk.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that this is what goes back to really, really being reflective of like, what is my intention with this thing? Is it to build my VO2 max? Like, am I trying to become a lot more cardiovascularly fit from this session? Or is that I'm trying to build a base? Like, I want to be able to do, something conversational. Am I just doing this because I enjoy it, or am I doing it because I'm trying to get something mobile in during the day? And so I love that point, which is that like walking can be equally as valuable as like doing assault bike, just depending on like what your goals are, how it fits in your training program. And both of them, quote unquote, count. Your body will count them as activity, as exercise.
Absolutely. What is one thing that someone can do today to put themselves in a better position for refueling and recovery?
I think that it would be to think about eating regularly throughout the day. So don't just think about, I think that it's really easy for us to just kind of get into these like numbers based things of like grows and calorie numbers and calories in, calories out. And I think one of the principles that is really, really underrated, especially for a woman, is regularity, which is just like the timing of what you're having matters. And especially as an athlete, it matters a lot. And so if you were to start somewhere, try to think about regularly having stuff throughout the day, starting early when you wake up and then just being consistent throughout the day.
That was so good. So I always ask this to my guests, what makes you imperfect?
Oh, wow. I really love this question because I think that it normalizes the imperfect part of like what is more usually a perfectionist driven sport. But I think that one of the big things would be that because I'm a perfectionist, tend to set really, really high expectations on myself, which can set me up for failure. It makes me feel like there's a lot of times where I'm not doing enough, and then that causes me to feel like I'm beating myself up or feel like I'm missing the mark, and that can be a really negative cycle to get in terms of burning out or in terms of even, like, how much like, kinda to the whole theme of this conversation, like, in terms of how effectively you are operating as a human, and I think that it's one of those things where, like, part of being perfectionism is really reflecting on, like, what are the expectations that we're setting for ourselves, and are they realistic? And I can think of, like, 80 billion things that are imperfect about myself, but I think that part of perfectionism and part of being self-aware is to be able to identify, like, what can you do well and what is going really catastrophically wrong. And so kind of the first thing that came to mind when you said that for me was, well, instead of just listing out all of these like self-critical voices that tend to just bounce around in my head constantly to nitpick all the things that I could be doing better and better and better, it's that I think that a lot of times as perfectionists, we need to step back and look at, okay, maybe I wasn't the problem here. Maybe the expectations that I was setting for myself were the problem. And I know for me, that is an area that I'm constantly working at trying to improve and be better at.
That was so good. The expectations that you're setting for yourself is probably the problem instead of you being the problem. I like that. Allison, this was a wonderful conversation. Where can everybody find you if they want to reach out and ask more questions or work with you?
Of course, yeah. So you can always DM me, you can reach out on Instagram, and my handle is Allison Yamamoto, which is my name. And I can also send you links maybe that we can include. And then if you're interested in working with me, you could reach out on Instagram, or you can check out my website, which is Koa Athletic Health or koaathletic.health. And I can also provide that link if folks are interested. You can learn a little bit more about the programs. You can sign up. There's free resources there. So You can always look out for things. And then lastly, if you're interested, I also write a Substack. So that you can find from my Instagram or from the website as well. Lots of ways for you to keep in touch if you're interested.
Amazing. Allison, thank you so much for coming on the Imperfect Cheerleader podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Imperfect Cheerleader podcast. Taking the time to listen while you're busy with all of life's responsibilities means the world to me. If you enjoyed this episode, here are a few ways you can support ICP. Number 1, hit the subscribe button so you always get newly released episodes and never miss them. Number 2, take a screenshot of the episode you listened to and tag at the professional cheerleader on Instagram. I love to repost your tags and shout you out on stories. And number 3, write a review on Apple Podcasts. This is the best way to show your support for the podcast and helps bring us even more guests, interviews, and topics. I hope you have a wonderful day and continue to work towards your goals of becoming a professional cheerleader, dancer, or someone who just loves to move, honey. I'll see you next time on another episode of the Imperfect Cheerleader podcast. Bye for now.